on this episode of the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast.
So I had to teach church history, and one thing in teaching church history on the 20th century, I began to realize how does church history and film history come together? What are the connections? What's happening in film that might reflect what's going on in the church?
We're on a mission from God.
Terry Lindvall, film historian and professor of church history, is with me again to talk about Christian film history. In this episode, we zero in on the subject of his latest book, God on the Big Screen, which considers the correlation between cinematic history and church history by looking at the prayers found in films. We'll also talk about the new horizons opening up in the new world of distribution and talk about Terry's favorite films. Dr. Lindvall is the author of 2 books on Christian film history, Sanctuary Cinema, which covers the silent era, and Celluloid Sermons, which covers the sound era up to 1986. He currently occupies the C.S. Lewis Chair of Communication and Christian Thought at Wesleyan University. This is episode 20. So what are some of your favorite films?
There are 2 that I use every time I teach my class on theology and film. One is called Ordette by Carl Dreyer, and it's a very slow film about a family of Lutherans, and there are different kind of conflicts in the family. There are 3 sons. The oldest son has basically lost his faith, but he has a very strong Christian wife. The middle son has been studying too much Kierkegaard and has gone crazy and thinks he's Jesus at some point, and the young son just wants to marry a woman from a more fundamentalist sect. And the father is the patriarch of all of this, is trying to hold it all together, and he's stubborn. And the wife of the oldest son dies, and it becomes kind of a crisis. And it is one of the most wonderful endings that you could ever imagine, because it's such a naturalistic film. And I'm not going to give away the ending, because you have to see it to just be blown away almost. And then the one that follows, usually one of the same actresses, is Babette's Feast, which is a great film on the Eucharist or on communion, the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
And it is a beautiful film about the fact that grace really rules all of our lives. And sometimes we think we've made the wrong decision, and yet at the end of our life we look back and we see how God's grace and mercy have really led us step by step into what His purpose was for us.
Yeah.
So those are 2 of my favorites that are there.
Yeah, those are great films. What did you think of Terrence Malick's Tree of Life?
Oh, Tree of Life is beautiful. It is a prayer in itself. It starts basically with creation and then combines evolution in a very kind of creative way.
Yeah.
And then just the whole contrast, the symbols of the Father being law and the Mother being grace. And we are torn between the 2, and all of us have that tension within us that we judge ourselves, we accuse ourselves even more than Satan does. We're tougher on ourselves and with the law, and yet the grace of the Mother keeps coming through and quietly whispering to us to say, listen to me. I am here to teach you love. I'm here to teach you what the faith is all about, what faith in Christ is all about. And to me, it was really a film that I just sit in and bathe in. It's just so beautifully done.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few films that I've seen throughout my life that, as a filmmaker, make me stop and I just reevaluate how I approach film. And Tree of Life was one of those films.
It's amazing. I agree wholeheartedly with you.
Because he brings a language and takes us to a plane that we don't normally think of in cinema, yet you see it put out by such a skilled storyteller, and you think, why haven't more people done films like this?
Yeah, because they're thinking of the bottom line as well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, films have to make their money back. I mean, there are great foreign films, too. Like when you look at The Little World of Don Camillo, it's an Italian film from the early 50s, and it's about a priest, Don Camillo, played by Fernandel, who talks to Jesus on the crucifix, and they have this ongoing conversation, and it's hilarious. There are times when he discovers in confession that it was the communist mayor who kind of threw eggs on him, And so he wants to go kick him or go beat him up. And the Lord says, no, you can't do that. He says, because I've blessed your hands. He says, what about my feet? Can I kick him? The Lord says, no, I haven't blessed your feet. You can go kick him. So while the mayor's up there repenting, he goes and kicks him. And it's just so human and so funny the way he talks to God, so natural that are there. But foreign films we've kind of missed a lot of that are out there.
Yeah, I think the foreign films give us a whole new way of thinking about films as well. I think, Hollywood, for as good as it is, it tends to be very conventional and very much the same kind of storytelling, whereas the foreign films, they experiment, they take you places that you hadn't really thought of going. And you've just recently released a new book, God on the Big Screen.
Yes, and it's been really kind of fun to do, because it took me through my own film history. One of the things that happened to me when I got fired from one university is I came to Virginia Wesleyan University, and they had half a space for me in film and communication, half a space for me in religious studies. So I had to teach church history, and one thing in teaching church history on the 20th century, I began to realize how does church history and film history come together? What are the connections? What's happening in film that might reflect what's going on in the church? And so this whole book is looking at kind of a century of films and finding parallels. For example, during the Depression, the films that come out, even under the repression of the code, are basically, Lord, give us our daily bread. When we get to the war and we find atheists kind of praying in foxholes, and we find other prayers during World War II, it's basically, Lord, deliver us from evil. And then when we get to the kind of death of God movement that comes in the 60s, we find that films have lost their faith, and they become very dark and very pessimistic and much more existential. But then during the 1980s, there's this revival in films where you have films like Places in the Heart or Witness, and these films become just, their prayers become honest again and genuine and very, very positive. And so you find this correlation, which is really fascinating to me, between church history and film history. During the Jesus movement in the 80s, that's when the films often become very positive again, from very simple, genuine ways.
I know you've said that you're not really up on what's happening in contemporary Christian filmmaking, but let me ask this question anyhow, because you are familiar with a little bit of it.
Yes,
I can tell. I mean, one of the things I've been asking myself is, as we're moving into this new distribution situation, all of Hollywood is changing the way they make films, finance films, distribute films. A lot of the old ways of financing and distribution are archaic now, and there's new ways coming. And with streaming, anybody can stream films. Do you think that there's an opportunity here that the church needs to rise to in this new era?
I think it's a wonderful opportunity right now. If you remember, there were a bunch of Roman Catholic nuns who got together and did an amazing film called Spitfire Grill about a young woman from prison who moves up to New England and has a second chance and really looks to see what God would have her do. It's just a beautiful film. And now we have films like The Queen of Katwe by Mira Nair, who just really show the lives of Christians in really simple ways. And so a lot of, I would say, independent producers and directors, and particularly writers. This is an opportunity for Christian writers to kind of move out of the little ghetto of writing kind of little sermons, but to say, how can I write a film script that really is honest to my own heart, but seeks to kind of work through Scripture and follow this kind of parables, or follow the great Christian writers. Everything from, C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams to Graham Greene, who was more controversial but still kind of deals with religious issues. And I think for writers to kind of find stories that really connect and really move them, and when they tell them to other people, move them, that they could kind of sell and project into the markets. I think more personal stories do need to come out, and I think that's happening. I think we have more Christian young writers out there trying things. But they've got to recognize it's a time of persevering, and they may be starving artists for quite a while, and to find a community, get together in a community that will support them and feed them while they are trying to be these artists.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you've got a wide breadth of understanding of what's been going on, both in secular cultural filmmaking as well as what Christians have been doing as filmmakers. And I think what you have to say to Christian filmmakers today is very valuable.
Good. Yeah, I thank you very much. And I think I've been blessed to just know a lot of Christians who are in the industry and who have been my students who are out there seeking to make their own films right now. So to see all of them, and I'm inspired. The fact it is Cutter Calloway from Fuller Seminary just wrote an article about a month ago in Christianity Today where he said, it's time for the old guard to pass the mantle on, much like we find in Toy Story 4, and we find the Iron Man kind of bequeathing his role to Spider-Man. These young artists are the ones that we need to encourage and help in any way we can. Yeah. And I think we're at that point in finding the opportunity for them.
So let me ask you this, because I think this is something that comes down to where the rubber meets the road, because a lot of Christians believe that one of the reasons Christian films are so bad is because they don't have a big enough budget. But when you have...
No. Oh, my goodness, no. That's what we won the Student Academy Award with Bird in a Cage. That cost us $20,000.
Yeah.
And so back in 1986, to do that, a bunch of students got together, Antonio Zarro, and some others, and we put together that film, and it was just an amazing film. The next year, Lisa Swain and Jim Lincoln and Jeannie Hardy came together and did Turtle Races. And it, again, had heart and had faith in it, but it was just, it were fun. The other thing that's often missing that were in both of those films, I think, that made them very accessible to other audiences was humor. We are afraid of humor, but humor is key and necessary to really move audiences. We go for kind of the heartstrings and trying to make people feel sad or something. Using humor is a much more effective way, I think, of getting past the censorship of non-Christians, because they say, okay, these people can laugh. They can laugh at themselves. They can laugh at the stories. They can laugh in their faith. And in that laughter, they find something so beautiful.
Yeah, because if you look at this, even the history of secular cinema, so many great films had very little budget. But what they had was heart. They had a vision, and they connected with people in that way. And
the vision is so key. The vision and heart and a good sense of humor, I think, are key elements there. The other place we need to look, where I think most of the creative work is going on, is in animation. And the National Film Board of Canada has done some of the best films like Pies, or films like The Big Snit, or Richard Conde's The Apprentice is one of the best parables. When I show it, nobody understands it. But then you begin to talk about it, you realize this is a parable straight from Jesus. And animated films have that ability to kind of be so quirky and so amazing that they work because they're short films, and this new millennial or Z generation, whatever they are, they're finding their attention span is not as long. And so to make short films is even a better thing, to get out there and get them on different kind of modes of communication.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, I'm in Montreal, where the NFB has its headquarters.
It's just they're incredible stuff they've done over the years.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to your book on animation when it comes out.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking at animated films as parables, and they're out there, and they're exemplary parables that say this is how you're supposed to live. But then there are revelatory parables which could disturb you and or just humor you. But you realize the more you think about them, the more they have a message for us. C.S. Lewis once said, "Our job as educators is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate desert.
Yes.
Particularly the deserts of the imagination. And the more that we can spur our students on to read a lot of things, see a lot of things, talk a lot of things, tell stories, the more they're going to be creative artists themselves. And so giving them opportunities like this and letting them just go wild, you could always kind of pull back in the editing room, but you let them go as wild as they want to, and you realize, no, God has really given them dreams and visions. Yeah. And let's see what they can produce.
I think one of the benefits to this whole new era of streaming is that we're not constrained to a certain time frame, and we're not writing things to a commercial break. We can actually it frees the art form to be bigger than what it's been traditionally in the last 40 years. And to me, that's exciting. It's exciting to think not only can we do things differently, we can structure them differently, and we can let the structures flow with the needs of the story rather than some predefined space. And
well, I think one of the geniuses behind that has to be Phil Vischer. When they did VeggieTales, he did so many different creative things. I mean, he was inspired by Disney and Monty Python together, and we find that he was able to use different formats, different kind of stories of his Bible stories, his silly songs, all of these things, and there were short little doses that people could have them, and they were memorable, and they would communicate them to other people. When they first started, I think it was just kind of a brilliant movement.
Yeah. No, he did something marvelous there. And I'm hoping I can get him on the podcast sometime soon.
Yeah, you should. Well, he came to our university, and we gave him an honorary MVA, which was a Master of Vegetable Arts. So he has our
funny.
only MVA ever, but he's a wonderful man and just a great storyteller too.
Terry, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to enlighten us about our history in film. I greatly appreciate the work that you've done for us.
This has really been a delight. I'm really honored to meet you, and I'm sure we'll be doing stuff in the future.
You can find more information about Dr. Lindvall and his books in the show notes for this podcast. And if you're interested at all in how we arrived at the point we are in Christian film, these books are an invaluable resource. And not only that, they're fun to read. In our next episode, Dr. Peter Leithart joins us to talk about Terrence Malick's magnum opus, The Tree of Life. Dr. Leithart wrote an entire book on the film called The Shining Glory, and he'll be here to talk with us about this film. Thank you for joining me on the Ministry of Motion Pictures podcast. You'll find show notes and more information about us at www.ministryofmotionpictures.org.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.